We were sitting, my wife and I were sitting in the house reading. It was so very quiet, and we heard this, we didn't know what it was at the time, but this tremor coming towards us, and we could feel it almost going under our feet. Shook the house, really did shake the house, and it frightened the life out of us. We didn't know what was going on. So I got my clothes together, came out. I looked out that way, out towards the Berwyns, and I could see light in the air, but I couldn't see anything else. So I walked over to the barn steps, and over the top of the bushes, I could see, well, my wife and, well, I saw it first. It's like a half a sun going down, bright orange. We thought a plane might have crashed, but as soon as we'd seen it, we'd realised there was no flames coming from it. It was a very defined line. At that point, I got my wife to come out and have a look at it. We were sort of quite frightened by it all. We didn't know what was going on, and so we decided to go down to Kai Pant, to the farm below us, to see what, because they were on the phone, and to see what they had to say about it.
It's about 400 yards from here, something like that?
Yeah, 400 or 500 yards, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
just across the fields.
We got my son out of bed, woke him up, got him out of bed, dressed up all of us because it was a winter's night, got him on the backpack, walked down to the farm. Arthur and Dillis and the children were all up. They had heard it. They had been on the phone to Llandriclo, to relatives there, and the whole village was out, police, and chaos, mayhem sort of thing.
Okay, and you didn't mention the explosion there, Mike. Did you hear an explosion?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay.
No,
okay.
We didn't know what was going on.
Okay, and how long did you observe the object for, and did it move at all?
No, it was very static,
Okay.
very static. Okay. And as I say, we then walked down to the farm. We must have been there 10 or 15 minutes talking with Arthur, and they decided to bring us home. Arthur came up with his son Dowie, and I said, well, come and look at it. So we all stood on the barn steps, and the four of us were watching it. And I'm not quite sure of time scale, but within front of our eyes, it just went down and disappeared, and then it was darkness.
So it actually went down and
Yes.
not up? And
No, it went down.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and
that was when it went down onto a lower ridge, although you didn't know that.
That's right.
so you think it actually disappeared behind a mountain? So it was still actually there, just you couldn't observe it from your point of view?
There is...
Yes, probably, yes. I don't know. I can't quite say.
Yeah, I've established since then there is a mid-distance hill called Kevin Koch, and the line of sight from this yard where Mike was looking goes straight through this ridge, and I've looked at the altitudes, the summits, and in fact, although you're still looking upwards, the line of sight from your eye looking upwards, this object sank behind Kevin Koch Ridge, and it just gave the impression it disappeared, because in the darkness of the night you couldn't see the ridge in front of the blackness of the mountains behind anyway, and all it did was just sank behind that and went out of view.
And how many witnesses were actually standing here, Mike, on that particular night?
There was Arthur, Dowie, Mary Ann, my wife, and myself.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you were how old at the time, Mike?
24.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, if we were to interview your wife at the time, she agrees with everything you've just said.
Absolutely, yeah. And she's the lady that would tell me if I was wrong.
Right.
She's got one of those memories that goes back to when she was 3 years old, that sort of thing.
Right. We also spoke to the farmer, Leon Pritchard, who still lives at the neighbouring farm. Leon's parents witnessed the object with Mike Saville, but Leon himself was outside of the immediate area at the time. He returned later that evening and was told about the event. Right. We're at the farm, which is about 400 yards away from where Mike Saville originally saw the UFO, and we're with Leon Pritchard, who wasn't here at that time, but actually came into the village of Llandriclo shortly after the event took place. Were you told anything when you got back here to the farm?
Well, only there'd been a tremor, and that Mick and Mary Ann had come down here from Garthgoch because they witnessed something in from Gascoch.
Did you feel the tremor where you were at that time? When you were in your
No, because we were travelling.
Right.
That we didn't feel anything.
Okay. So your father and your brother, you've been told,
Yeah.
went out with Mike to witness
Yes.
the object, and did they
Yeah.
describe it to you at all? What they saw with Mike?
Yes. So like what Mike said, this ball of fire or ball of light was on the side of the mountain. One witness, my mother's friend at the time, I remember speaking to her a few days later, and she saw this light rising from the mountain and going along the top of the mountain like this and just disappearing.
Was this on the same night then?
On the same night, yeah.
The good thing about this yard and the front door of the house is that it's rectangular.
Right.
And the line of sight as you come out the door is naturally confined to this narrow corridor.
Okay.
And it was a simple matter of drawing a line across Google Earth and copying it onto a map.
Right.
And the parameters of the line of sight that Pat Evans had, and where they bisect is where the UFO must have been.
We've just left the location where Mike Saville witnessed the UFO. We're now on the B4391 on the route that Pat Evans took. Okay, we've just pulled over now, which is the point where Pat Evans stopped when she observed the circular craft.
Well, this is where Mrs. Evans and Mr. Evans brought me in 1991 and stopped right here. The fencing was down then, and they pointed out to me that lighter field there, and they said that this object was sitting just on the ridge above.
I'm just standing with Scott Felton here, and we're standing at the point where Pat Evans stopped her car and got out with her two daughters, and we've got an Orden survey map, and Scott's going to point out Pat's line of sight on this Orden survey map.
Yeah, this is the B4391 from Bala and Llanderfel, where Pat Evans lived. She travelled up this road. At this point where we are now, she stopped for 5 minutes to look at the object across the way on the hill there in the pitch black of the night, and then after 5 minutes she went along the road to the county boundary, turned round, returned to this spot and spent about another 10 minutes looking at the object before departing for home. But this line is her line of sight straight across the mountain, roughly towards the summit of Moelsich. That's a sub-peak of Cadair Berwyn. And this faint line across the map here is the perfectly aligned line from the yard at Garth Goch, which was Mike Saville's place.
Okay.
This is the point of intersection on the mountain. There's absolutely no dispute about the line of sight, both lines of sight, which means that allowing for a little bit of variation, within a couple of 100 square yards, that is the point on the mountain where the UFO sat.
Okay.
The actual point of intersection on this mountain slope here is, you've got this bit of forestry down here. You can draw a line.
Let me zoom in on that bit of forestry. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
You draw a line up the face of the forestry there.
Okay, yeah.
Up the grassy slopes. It levels out slightly just below where that scree and heather starts. That's the blackened patches, the dark patches.
Yes, yes.
And the peak of Cadair Berwyn is in the background, a lot further on again.
Yep.
Where the UFO sat on the ground, or presumably on the ground, just below those dark patches. And as you can see, it's a clear view. Anyone who was here would have a commanding view of that object.
And of course, as you can see, it's a very, very bleak, and it must have been really bleak in wintertime and very dark. And then they drove on to the hidden car park there, which we'll be going to shortly.
Okay.
And turned around then, and then they came home. Takes about 15 minutes, I think, or 15 to 20 minutes from her house to here.
Right. I mean, other than the Evans in the party that was here with Mike, are there any other witnesses?
Not necessarily all of the people who told me about it actually saw it themselves. They'd been told by their uncle or aunt or cousin or whatever, you know, who had been, who had actually been up this track, as they said, and seen this thing through a forested area, they said, and they could see it through the trees. Sitting on the ridge of the mountain. Unfortunately, Scott and I have never been able to find out which track these people went up or where they saw it from. At first I used to think it was the same area that Mike is living in, but I don't think it was.
So this is a third group of witnesses then?
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. Quite irrespective of Pat Evans and Mike and his neighbours.
Mike Saville viewed the object at a different angle to that of Pat Evans. According to Scott Felton's Ardent survey map, their lines of sight were at 85 degrees to each other. Two different perspectives of the object at slightly different times. They both describe the object as circular in shape. We can conclude then that they were probably seeing a spherical object. Pat Evans describes in her statement that the object she viewed was comparable in size to the moon, which we know was below the horizon. According to the map, she was 2,530 meters away from the object. Using this basic data, it is possible to get a reasonable estimate of the size of the object. When looking at the moon from Earth, the angle subtended to your eye is half a degree. In other words, if you draw two lines from your eye, one to the top of the moon and one to the bottom, the resulting angle is half a degree. This means if you view an object which appears to be the same size as the moon, for example by placing an apple in front of you so it appears the same size as the moon, the angle subtended by the apple is the same, half a degree. Simple trigonometry shows that an object placed at a distance of 2,530 meters, i.e. the distance of the object viewed by Pat Evans, which subtends the same angle, would be 22 meters in diameter. If we now look at the sketch which was copied by a police officer from Pat Evans' original sketch, it is suggesting the object was slightly smaller than the moon. To allow for this, if we reduce the size by 30%, we arrive at a figure in the order of 15 meters in diameter. This was not a small object. Let's just illustrate what a 15-meter diameter glowing sphere would look like next to these houses. Now that we have an idea of the size of this object, let's recap on the timing of the events. The officially recorded time of the explosion was 8:38 p.m. Mike Saville came out of his house a few minutes later.
As far as I'm concerned, between sort of it happening and getting ourselves together and going down the farm and coming back here, I would have thought it must have been 40 minutes, 3/4 of an hour.
And we know it disappeared from sight about 9:20, which ties in with your 3/4 of an hour. And what it was effectively doing was landing and behind a hill, and once it went out of their vision, it was gone. Pat Evans left their house about 20 to 10. It was 10 o'clock, or just about 10 o'clock, when Pat Evans discovered it. So 35 minutes later. She stopped for 5 minutes to look at the object across the way on the hill there, in the pitch black of the night, and then after 5 minutes she went along the road to the county boundary, turned round, returned to this spot, and spent about another 10 minutes looking at the object before departing for home. A little village called Llangonog, which is the next village along that very road that Pat Evans was on. I got told of a witness in that village who claims she saw what she called a UFO flying over their village heading towards the English border at 10:20. Pat Evans a few days later said she was sorry she didn't actually stay a bit longer because she'd heard through other people, I expect, that the UFO had departed about 10 minutes after she'd left the scene. So that ties in with that 10 minute time frame and this other witness a few miles down the road saying she saw this thing pass over their village.
So in total, we've got the UFO as being on the mountainside for about an hour and 40 minutes in total.
Oh yeah, it was there for quite some time.
That night, locals in Llandrillo were perplexed to see a significant military presence arrive in their remote village. Just 50 minutes after the explosion, Leon Pritchard arrived back in the village at 9:30 p.m, returning by car from a welding course.
Well, we were coming home from the Bala, direction of Bala, and as soon as we arrived in Llandrillo, we were aware of something was going on, because it was mayhem really, because a lot of police cars and army trucks
Okay.
in the village, which was very unusual.
Were there any police as well as army then?
There was police there, not in as heavy numbers as the army though.
Okay. And how many army would you estimate that you saw?
Well, I saw 2 trucks. That's all I saw, because they were stopping. Presumably they'd gone up the mountain to do whatever they wanted to do, and they were stopping everybody else.
So they were stopping cars?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
The other thing that I could say is that evening there was a propeller engine plane droning up and down the Berwyns, up and down, up and down.
Before or after?
Afterwards.
Right.
And it seemed to be, I don't know, I can't remember what time we went to bed, but for sure it was going up and down, up and down.
Okay.
A propeller type plane, not a jet.
The sudden appearance of the army suggests that armed forces were already conducting exercises in the area on that night before the time of the explosion, as it would have been impossible for the army to be contacted, dispatched and travelled by road to the village within 50 minutes. In her research, UFO investigator Margaret Fry has uncovered further witnesses who observed military vehicles on the night of the incident. In 1996, Dave Roberts contacted Margaret explaining that he had been living with his mother in the small hamlet of Glenduffrey on the A5, 8 miles northeast of Llandrillo, when they heard the huge explosion and earth tremor on the 23rd of January 1974. Between 9 and 9:30 p.m. they heard rumbling noises and looked out to see closed military vehicles passing through their hamlet heading west towards Llandrillo. This ties in with Leon Pritchard's sightings of military vehicles in Llandrillo. They stayed awake to watch for further vehicles, as this was such an unusual happening in this remote location. Over the years, Margaret has held yearly meetings in the area to find new witnesses. Several of the witnesses at these meetings have confirmed to Margaret that they saw military vehicles heading towards the Berwyns that night.
Well, Margaret Fry's had reports in the past, just a couple of days or so after the incident when the UFO was on the mountain. A witness, who I don't know who it is, apparently came past here and saw an army wagon in this little hidden car park. A couple of soldiers milling about, and somewhere here were 2 more soldiers, 4 soldiers in total, 2 each carrying a box off the mountainside here.
Let's now look at the scientific evidence which has been put forward to suggest that an earthquake took place that night. I obtained a copy of the report by the British Geological Survey. Doubt is cast immediately before one even begins to read the first page with the title, "The Enigmatic Bala Earthquake." Enigmatic meaning not clear to the understanding, perplexing or mysterious. I showed the report to an expert who has a PhD in geology. After reading the report, he contacted me and wanted to point out certain aspects. He drew my attention to a map shown in the report of the stations used to measure the seismic activity. The triangles show the locations where seismic measuring equipment recorded the tremor. In 1974, there was no measuring station within 150 miles of Llandrillo. Here is a trace from the report of what was recorded at one of the stations. The geologist explained to me that it is impossible to determine from this trace whether it was caused by an impacting object or from an earthquake. He then went on to explain how the centre of the tremor is determined using the data from each measuring station. They simply compare the relative magnitudes of the seismic activity at each station, and based on this triangulate the most likely position of the source. The size of the tremor measured at each station is not necessarily indicative of the distance. Factors such as the type of intervening rock come into play. In summary, it was impossible to locate the epicenter of this event with any accuracy using the seismic data. The second method the seismologists used to determine the epicenter is to send out questionnaires to the public. They then plot the results of the survey on a map using a scale of 1 to 5 regarding how strongly people felt the tremor. This map from the report shows the intensities felt by local people, 5 being the strongest. The circle shown in the center is about 15 miles across. The report mentions 2 previous geological studies of this event, one done in 1980 by Burton and Nielsen, who determined the epicenter was likely to be here, one done in 1988 by Turbot and Innes, who determined the epicenter was likely to be here, and this report, which determined the epicenter was likely to be here. This map is important to our investigation, as we shall see later in the film. The geologist drew my attention to this table, which he thought was highly ambiguous. The table gives 2 estimates of the depth of the tremor, derived from the 1980 and 1988 reports. Before I explain the table, I need to explain standard deviation. When using data of a statistical nature where a value cannot be specified exactly, scientists give a figure along with that figure's error, expressed in terms of its standard deviation. For example, if the scientist said the earthquake depth was 100 meters, with a standard deviation of 10 meters, we can show this on a normal distribution graph. We put the mean figure of 100 meters in the middle, with plus 1 standard deviation, 110 meters, and minus 1 standard deviation, 90 meters. What the graph is showing is we are not certain what the depth was, but can be 68% sure the depth was between 90 and 110 meters. If we go to 2 standard deviations, we can be 95% sure the depth was between 80 and 120 meters, and so on. Now let's look at the depths described in the table and put them on the normal distribution graph. The first report states 15 kilometers as the depth, but does not give a standard deviation figure. The second gives 7.5 kilometers as the depth and 12.5 kilometers as the standard deviation. Incidentally, both these depths are extremely shallow for an earthquake. Any earthquake less than 70 kilometers is considered shallow. If we put the data on a normal distribution graph, it doesn't really make any sense. It is suggesting there is a 68% chance that the tremor occurred at a depth between -5 kilometers and 20 kilometers. -5 kilometers, in other words, above the surface. Surely not. The geologist agreed after studying the report there is no conclusive evidence whatsoever that an earthquake occurred. In light of the other factors involved, namely the army presence and the witness testimony, the most likely cause of the tremor, in my personal opinion, was an impact. If this is the case, this does not necessarily mean the object witnessed by Pat Evans and Mike Saville was the impacting object, although that is one possibility. It's also possible that the object descended in response to whatever impacted moments earlier. In order to get more information, we decided to drive along the floor of the valley and knock on the doors of the farms and houses between Llandrillo and the Berwyn Mountain. In our investigation, we were informed by a local that a military unit hired and occupied an outhouse building as a base camp for a duration of between 6 and 8 weeks following the explosion. We went along to this outhouse to see if we could locate the owner. This seemed like a promising lead. I informed Scott Felton about the claims of an army unit using the outhouse. Scott made some Freedom of Information request inquiries, but to no avail. He then managed to contact the previous owners of the cottage, who told him the army did not use the outhouse in 1974 but had rented it in the 1980s after a plane crash.
It's just like an old workshop.
So this turned out to be a dud lead. Scott has made many contacts in and around Llandrillo during his research. One of the locals, who he believes to be reliable, has given him information from a witness who Scott believes lived in a small holding on the foot of the valley below Berwyn. Scott has a good idea of who this witness is, but we cannot name them as we have not had the identity confirmed and the witness does not want to be named. But the witness wanted it to be known that on the night in question, a soldier who had been on the Berwyn mountain in response to the event walked from the side of the mountain to the witness's property. The soldier then asked if he could use the family's telephone, as he explained the army's radios on the mountainside were not working. The soldier may well have been a member of the same team that Pat Evans witnessed when she saw torchlights at 10 p.m. We know from Scott's map within a few hundred metres where the object was, and we also know the locations of the nearest small holdings. Scott believes he knows which house the soldier called at, but we cannot name it as the individual insists we do not identify them. We decided to walk from the foot of the valley where the small holdings are located up to the spot where the object was sighted, thus retracing the path of the soldier who came to use the phone. We drove as far as physically possible in the car before making the rest of the journey on foot.
Which is the same side that the UFO was spotted on. So we're gonna go. Oh, bloody hell! This vehicle is not made for this road. Jesus. Right, so there's a farmhouse up there that, yeah, this is going over the river, so cross your fingers. We're probably going to get a very strange look when we arrive at this farmhouse. Okay, as we drive up. This is Pat Oldfield, who lives... What's the name of this house, Pat?
Blaen y Pennant.
Okay, and we reckon this is the last house along the line of the river, on the side of the river where the UFO is believed to have come down against the side of the mountain. So Pat's just informed us that she walks her dog up this path. So we're going to go and have a look at it, see if we can read anything into it, and then perhaps climb a little bit further up the side of the mountain and just sort of survey where the craft is alleged to have landed. If we keep walking through this forest, we should get to the end of the trees. When we come out of this forest, we should be able to see the B4391, and we'll be almost at the spot where the UFO came down.
We continued along the track towards the open land where the object was sighted. But before we reached the end of the trees, came across an interesting feature.
Right, we walked to the end of this path, which is right at the edge of the forest, just before the spot where the UFO came down. Now, we found this geological feature, you might call it, at the end of the path. It's very intriguing. It may just be a geological feature, but there's a huge sort of almost a crater in the side of this hill here, and there should be open land here where we should be able to see the road. Right, it looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel, thank God, because it's pretty spooky in these woods. Right, we've come out in the edge of the woods, and these stones here are all they're marked on the ordnance survey. So the point we need to be is just up this hill a little bit. So we're going to nip over this fence here. This is not the sort of terrain you would normally go walking out on. Extremely steep hill which has rocks all over it, and there was a suggestion years ago that the UFO was a poacher's tent. Anyone camping on this land would be absolutely out of their mind on a cold January evening. Nearly there. Okay. Oh, some snow over there. Right. So we've reached a ridge. Okay. There's the end of the line of trees. We can see the road. This is the road that Pat Evans viewed the UFO from. See, there's a van there. There are no roads. It's completely inaccessible. So it would have took the army some time to climb up this hill. And like I say, their radios didn't work. Why didn't they work? You can safely say there's not many people been to this UFO landing site. And we're retracing our steps back to the first available farmhouse. I'm very curious about this huge indentation in this hillside, which is not far from the alleged UFO landing site. A groove running round it, and I have made some calculations on what Pat Evans said, that the UFO was approximately 15 meters wide. This could just be a perfectly normal geological, phenomenon or whatever, but there's a definite groove. There's a groove, you can see, running around here. What is this? So it's actually indented, semicircular. If I step up there, you can see. We need to get a metal detector. Could be significant. I'd love to come back and dig it all up.